Hello and welcome to 18 WJTS Inform. I'm your host, Bill Potter. We are honored to have in the studio, as we have for the past Fridays throughout the legislation this year, all the way January until now, State Senator Mark Messmer. And he's been kind of summarizing what has been happening each week in the legislation. But now the legislation has ended as of last Friday. And we're going to kind of summarize some of the things that have happened. Now, there's a lot to cover, so we're going to do two shows, one tonight and then one that will run a week from now, next Friday, featuring State Senator Mark Messmer. Well, Senator, the session did end, and things went well.
It was a good session. We did get done actually Saturday morning at 12:54 a.m. We needed to be done by today, but there's a large convention in town this week. Hotel accommodations for the guys who stayed in hotels were not available, so we got done a week early. Really went well. The budget is the one and only bill we are required by the Constitution to pass. We do a biannual budget. There were 1,261 bills filed in the House and Senate. We had 580 Senate bills, 681 House bills. Of that, 272 actually passed. And of that, we had 133 Senate bills and 139 House bills. And it amazes me every year how close those two numbers are, usually within one or sometimes exactly the same. But it's not unusual for a House and Senate version of the same bill to be worked on at the end of session. And I'm sure, Speaker Bosma and President Pro Tem Long, they meet daily, as we get toward the end of session, and they look to see, okay, your senator has this one, my House member has this one. Our numbers are looking a little out of balance here, so one of them drops off at the end.
Sure, you want to be as close as possible.
As close as possible.
Because a lot of these bills are basically the same.
Sometimes they are the identical bill, and the House sponsor and the Senate author or vice versa are the same, same people working on the same bill. So that's not unusual, and sometimes the slight changes in one or the other, they'll amend, one version or the other to get the final counts to be pretty darn close. I don't know that I've seen them off more. Being 3 apart is the most I've seen probably in 9 years. So, and of that, we had one bill that was a straight party line vote through the entire session, where usually you had either, some Democrats, Republicans vote for or against, but when the budget bill came through in the first week in April, the first time we voted on it, that one was a straight party line vote, the only one we had. 96% of the bills had bipartisan yes votes. A lot of them had bipartisan no votes. But of that, 57% were unanimous. So we do have a lot of bills that pass, unanimous in the House and Senate. So that shows a really high degree of bipartisanship in our legislative body, and folks do try to work together pretty hard.
Now, you mentioned that you had to pass the budget. That's what you do this year. So this is a budget that will start July 1st.
July 1st.
Go until June 30th of 2018, 19?
19,
okay.
Right. Okay. And then, and of the budget bill, the budget bill spends $32.3 billion over that biennium. We'll spend $15.9 billion, starting this July 1, and $16.4 billion the next year. And of that, 56% of our budget is education spending, which is a pretty large chunk of that.
Yes, that is.
$14.2 billion of that goes to K-12 education. And of that, we had a $345 million increase in K-12 tuition support. $30 million per year of that goes to teacher appreciation bonuses. It's money that goes to the schools. It has to get paid to the teachers in pay raises. It can't go to fund for insurance and building costs and administrative costs. It has to get paid directly to the teachers. So we want to make sure they're all getting, all of the schools in my district are all getting between $50 and $150 per student per year more money. A couple have declining, tuition or declining student enrollments, so sometimes their budgets are, more or less flat, from one year to the next because of student, enrollment declines.
So then, in turn, I guess, do the schools then do a 2-year budget themselves?
They do.
Because now they know that this money's going to come.
Yeah, and it
they don't know beyond that.
Used to be budgeting. They would do budgets. They would do teacher contracts and budgets on maybe 3 and 4 year cycles and commit themselves to spending in years farther out than the budget. But we started that probably 5 years ago, where they have to pass a budget that is in sequence with the state budget, so they know what they're getting, what they're committing to, and it just makes a lot more sense. It makes makes their administrative processes a lot cleaner. Within that budget, we have $15 million per year to teach English to non-English speaking students, whether they be Hispanic or Russian or Chinese. I mean, there's some districts across the state that have pretty high degree of foreign students from all over the world. $9 million of that per year will be additional money for what they call school security grants. Whether they want to put in cameras, they want to put electronic locking doors, whatever they want to do to increase security in their school buildings. $4 billion of the budget goes to higher education, and of that, $2.7 billion goes to the colleges, the state colleges, for just operation of their colleges, tuition support for the college students. Of that, another $700 million is in financial aid, 21st Century Scholars, other student grants for college students. $4.2 billion in Medicaid spending. That's a lot of money. But that's one of the larger items in our budget is Medicaid, and within that is the Healthy Indiana, the HIP 2.0 program falls within that. So $4.2 billion of over the biennium. That's the total, about half and half each year. We've got extra money in there for home health care workers. We've heard criticism that that the funding to that program was a little tight, and it was hard to pay people that want to do in-home health care a decent salary. So we've got $10 million more in the budget to allow for some pay increases to people in the home health care field. Some decent raises for our state police and DNR conservation officers. Our state police made considerably less money than most of the metropolitan police departments, and we had a lot of turnover of folks that had been trained extensively to be state policemen, and then Indianapolis Police Department or other metropolitan departments, they need somebody, and they take somebody. We just spent tens of thousands of dollars training, so we to get them parity with with other states, parity with the larger departments across the state. Really overdue. We had started looking into that deeply a couple years ago. This year we made it a budget priority to make sure they got caught up. One of the more interesting pieces we had in the budget this year, we've heard complaints and even we've got some efforts locally for what they call venture capital angel investor programs to try to incentivize startup companies, the high-tech companies, entrepreneurs. And we've got a lot of programs that are set up for for the startup folks. But when you have companies that are wanting to to grow their companies in that high-tech field, we were really not very competitive with other states, and really didn't do a good job of having programs to incentivize growth of high-tech companies in our state. So we've got in the budget this year $250 million venture capital investment, what they call a revolving loan fund for companies that are maybe a mid-range company that wants to grow, and puts us in a much better competitive that'll put us at a higher level in that venture capital fund than any of our surrounding states, and put us really in the running with what most other states across the country are doing. 125 million of that we've got what we'll call the Next Generation Highway Trust Fund. We're going to that money just sets to let interest accumulate that we spend on infrastructure each year. We're going to use 125 million of that as part of this venture capital investment, and any growth from that will go back into that 21st century road fund, and then be used to help support road and bridge maintenance. They're going to also allow state employees to invest part of their private retirement account. That you could allocate. Right now you can have different mixes of aggressive or conservative investing of your 401k plan. Basically, they'll let you take 20% of that, of your 401k plan and invest it in this venture capital fund that the state's going to administer. So they'll take a little bit of time to get the rules set up, who's going to administrate it, what all their fiduciary responsibilities will be, but it'll be managed, similar to all of our other retirement investment programs that we have at the state. But really a very creative way to get us in the game on trying to incentivize high-tech venture capital companies in our state. We've got $2.5 billion per year in road funding, and we'll cover that more detailed next week. But we were spending about $1.5 billion roughly per year. We're going to raise that to about $2.5 billion per year, and that's a combination of state, and federal and fuel tax and all of those. But those are significant investments, a big proportion of our state budget. Along with that, we do a pretty good job of paying down, some state debt, retire some bonds, and put about $600 to $700 million per year into our teacher pension funds. Normally, they like to have 80% of your future liabilities, covered with age of our baby boomers and teachers that have retired. We're a little underfunded in that fund, so for probably the next still 8 to 10 years, we're going to have to put about $600 to $700 million extra budget money, into that fund to get it caught up. And at least we can see light at the end of the tunnel. 10 years ago, we were probably double, underfunded where we are now, but we keep chipping away at that to make sure there's plenty of money in there to pay the retirement funds of folks down the road.
Is there any part of that budget that's rainy day money?
We keep about 11% of our overall budget in reserve funds. It'll be about $1.8 to $1.9 billion, kind of in that range. And of that, of that $1.8 billion, about $1 billion of that is really in funds that are committed. $500 million of that is our Major Moves Trust Fund.
Okay.
About $350 million of that is put into a tuition reserve account. So if we have a downturn in the economy, we don't have to cut funding to schools. We pull out of that to make sure if we've committed over the next 2 years, to the money that we've got, for K-12 spending in our education, we put a reserve fund in that if the economy dips, they pull from that. They don't have to withhold money from local schools.
Is it my misinterpretation? Indiana's pretty good with the rainy day fund. Haven't we been one of the better states as far as having money to cover some situations?
We are one of the probably 8 states that have what they call a AAA bond rating, and that truly reflects your cash reserves, your low debts. All of those things factor into your stability. From a financial aspect across the country, and for We've always had a requirement that the state doesn't go into debt, and but we do have a constitutional amendment that we're going to talk about maybe next week. But we've done a pretty good job of making sure we keep a reasonable amount of money in the bank, to cover for downturns in the economy. So,
one more question about the budget. Is there anything new in it this year that has not existed before? That's a brand new budgetary line. I know some things get a little tweaking here and there, but those are things that always existed. But it's like a new expense that no one saw coming.
Well, one thing that we're committing new money to this year, it's really become, unfortunately, a problem. For drug rehab problems, heroin addiction, opioid addictions have really gotten to be not just in Indiana, really, nationwide, a problem. And we've got $5 million in the budget, for new treatment programs, for rehab centers, to help get folks who are stuck with, in drug addiction, with those type of problems, to get them treatment and get them recovery and addiction services. That nothing that's a huge budget item, but there's a lot of the venture capital fund this year. That's a totally new item. But probably new commitment to, given that we let the governor hire a drug czar, and we passed a multitude of bills dealing with, with different treatment and addiction and law enforcement and needle exchange programs, things that they can tailor, and we gave them then more or less a blanket budget to, okay, you implement what you think are the best strategies, and sometimes those might vary in different parts of the states to help combat, drug addiction issues.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming in. And so come back next week, because obviously we didn't talk about everything the legislation did, and we'll be talking more about the road funding. That'll be taking effect July 1st. It'll affect everybody who drives. And we appreciate you coming in, Senator.
My pleasure.
Thanks for coming back. And so part 2, I guess you could say, of State Senator Mark Messmer will be aired next week. We thank you for joining us tonight on 18 WJTS. We are local people watching local people.